So first things first, let's see what's behind the visor. And as you'd imagine, it is just an arm. Well, that's okay, because it's not about what's on the outside, it's what's on the inside that matters. We've heard that pretty often before, but it rings especially true here. So at this point, you're probably asking yourself, what the heck is he talking about? It's just an arm cannon! Well, it's not just an arm cannon. If we move the camera inside the arm cannon, you can actually see all the glowy bits that you would probably expect if you took the camera inside there. However, if you take the camera on the side of the cannon, you can see a very interesting design on the left. And it's pretty clear that it represents the 4 beams that you get throughout the game. Now what about the visor HUD itself? How does that look? Well, it's pretty interesting. It's actually 3D rendered. It actually has textures attributed to it that you actually cannot see in the normal game. And it's very huge. If you ever zoom out the camera enough, you always see that it's kind of taking up a large amount of space. Which of course is not good for boundary breaking, so you will not be seeing very much of it from this point on. Meta Ridley. It was this game where you basically solidified the fact that you were a series mainstay, and that Kraid was not. But anyway, that's besides the point. Why are we looking at Ridley right now? Well, one good reason is that we actually can take a look at Ridley before the engagement with Samus, now that we can move the camera around. And it appears that what the scene was meant to convey was that this was where Meta Ridley was built, and that before Samus engages Ridley, he is still hooked up to this support system that the Space Pirates made for him. Now, one really cool thing in particular that I never noticed is that Meta Ridley's weak point is a weak point for a very good reason. It's not just because it's a glowy bit, no sir, it's because his heart is actually exposed, and the developers actually textured a heart to represent that. Not really a smart move from a design standpoint, but, well, the Space Pirates were never really all that bright to begin with. Okay, so now we have landed on the planet of Talon IV. And do we have any hidden bits right at the very beginning of the game? Hey, of course we do, man. So when we take a closer look at Samus' ship, there's one very obvious aspect about it, and that is that Samus descends into it to go and save her game. Now the question then becomes, is there anything below where Samus descends? And yes, there is. Beyond the hatch door, there is a small circular tube, and that circular tube is actually textured. Not much to say about it, except for one thing in particular, which is that it looks like there's a visor piece installed along the lining, which is actually a pretty nice touch for something that you can't see. Alright, so there are 2 things to show off in this scene. One is that we meet our bird quota today, because if you kept up with my show, you learned that almost every video game has birds flying off in the distance at some point in its game, and for some odd reason they oftentimes put a lot more detail into the birds than they really ever needed to. But in this case, the developers of Metroid Prime I think they figured out that not many people are going to be looking at these birds, so it looks like they just slapped on some random texture and just called it a day. But while zooming in on these little birds, I found that this one particular hallway in this game has an enormous amount of detail hidden away for the structures of the Chozo ruins. And while I can't get the environment to fully render, because whenever Samus is facing one direction, everything behind her disappears, we can spin the camera around and get an idea of how it's supposed to look. I'm thinking that this is an idea that they had early on. They went through the trouble, and then they realized that you can't really see most of everything that you were just looking at, so they kind of just scrapped the idea for all the other hallways. So do you want another example of how immaculate the detail is in this game? Especially the environments. Check this out. Many people, like myself in the past, have probably walked through this hallway before and never even noticed that through the grating there is actually lava underneath. And of course, even if you did notice, it's surprising to me how much detail they put into it. So many areas of Metroid Prime have little morph ball segments, where the perspective goes completely 2.5D, and you have no control over the camera, you're basically just going left to right. And I've always wondered, well, what else is going on in this area? Now, again, there are a lot of areas, but I thought that this one in particular was the most interesting because it had a completely encased wall, whereas many of the other areas don't have that. I do want to show you guys the rest of the segments, though. Maybe I'll dedicate an entire episode to it? Maybe. We'll see. So a lot of people might be asking, why don't you just take the camera everywhere? Like, there's so many areas where there's cliff sides, what are beyond the cliff sides, and all that. Well, I hope that this segment kind of shows you what happens when we go above the boundaries of most of the areas of the game, and also show you what happens when Samus goes outside of said boundaries. Also, in doing so, I'm going to show you that there's a little bit of a detail to this tower here that you can normally see. Very cool, not particularly interesting, but that's why we're doing this segment instead. And that is that when Samus gets outside the boundaries, you find that there's really nothing there to see. And once you do step outside, you're basically on the other side of a wall that you cannot pass through. So, to all of you future pioneers out there, if you're willing to try to find some new areas, save often. Because many times, you'll find yourself not being able to get back to where you came from. Because it's not as easy as just walking through the outside of the wall. Unfortunately, the wall penetrates you from both sides. So in many segments of Metroid Prime, in very bright areas, you can oftentimes see Samus's reflection in her own visor. And that's really cool, but the only problem is that you can't really see the full detail of it. But if there's no objects to muddy up the image of her face, we can see it a whole lot better. Ah, there we go. Now that's a hero's face right there, folks. In the void. A hero's face in the void. it sounds like an album title. So one of the cutscenes in Phendrana Drifts depicts Ridley flying overhead. It's very mysterious. So mysterious. But you know what? Part of my show is getting rid of mysteries, so let's do that. And if we follow the camera to Ridley, we find out that they actually retextured Meta Ridley's body entirely to have a snowy blue look to it. So it's not really blue and hazy off in the distance. This texture just gives you the illusion of it. So maybe this is just me, but throughout playing Metroid Prime, I noticed there was a lot of areas where it felt like a morph ball could go there, but you never were able to. So I always wondered to myself, what if I could take a morph ball there? Well, now we have the technology to find that out. And by doing so, we find out, at least in this one particular area, that almost certainly looks like it was meant for a morph ball to run through it. But maybe they changed their minds about it, because instead of you being able to use your morph ball, these particular statues are used to pour water out. But beyond the hatches, there's a lot more going on inside. So much so, in fact, that it really does indicate that at one point there was supposed to be something else going on besides pouring water out of these statues. Now this segment in particular is really cool to me because I'm a humongous dork, but apparently in this one room, this single one room, if you zoom the camera above the ceiling, you come to find out that there's actually a rooftop beyond that. Now there's no reason for there to be a rooftop because you can never actually see it when you're playing the game. Furthermore, the developers never made a roof for any other room in the game because, well, it really is redundant. It makes no sense. It's a waste of effort. But in this one room, there is a roof, for whatever reason, and it's textured specifically to be a roof. I don't even know how I honestly can't even remember why I even thought to look. But hey, we found it, and it's awesome! So I'm inside the ship that was at the beginning of the game, now submerged underwater, and I noticed that there's a duct that's morph ball sized. And you know what? I'm sure you know exactly what I'm thinking at this point. If it's morph ball sized, why don't we bring a morph ball in there? Well, let's do it. Oh. Uh-oh. Oh no. We're falling away from existence. That's so sad. Well, that was depressing. Let's try one more duct. You know, we see one more, we try one more. Makes sense, right? Alright, let's do it. Oh. So, this time I'm in the live stream from Final Fantasy VII. Cool-ish. Moving on. So the hub area that you need all the artifacts for to open up the area to reach Metroid Prime is absolutely gorgeous, and it slays me that at no point can you really get a great look at this beautiful area of the game. Until now. So we're gonna zoom ourselves out, and as you already know, if you move Samus out of perspective of certain areas of the environment, it makes the environment disappear. But if you make Samus rise up far enough, then it's forced to render everything into one shot. And so when we pull that off, we get this beautiful look at the Chozo Ruins artifact spot. So now that we're at the end of the game, we can finally get a better look at Metroid Prime. And it's no surprise to anybody who's ever gotten to the end of the game that you do get to see Metroid Prime's face within this exoskeleton that it made for itself. But one thing that we did not know by taking Magic Camera around is that you actually can see that Metroid Prime in its entirety is inside the exoskeleton. And that includes the blue plasma, the little antennae or tentacles or whatever you want to call them. It's all there. So once Metroid Prime is finally defeated, it latches onto Samus and takes away her Phazon suit. Now, what this scene was always meant to signify was that it didn't just take away the suit, it kept it for itself to become Dark Samus later on, which becomes abundantly clear once we move the camera around. In this particular scene, there's actually an unused animation that's unseen, but more importantly, as Metroid Prime expands, you can see that the Phazon suit is actually still inside Metroid Prime. Now at this point, it should have been gone entirely. It has nothing really to do with this changed up scene, so it was obviously intentional to stay there and was meant to be seen by the player, but they scrapped it. Okay, that was Metroid Prime. Was it worth the wait? I hope so. So this week, I'm going to let you guys choose which episode you want to do. This time it's going to be either Paper Mario for the Nintendo 64 or Sonic Adventure again. Because I know there was a lot of requests for that, and I want to make sure that there's an opportunity. So, if that's what you guys want to see, vote for either or, let me know, and we can get started on it. I'll see you guys next week. For sure. I'm not going to take as much time this time, so stay tuned. Oh, man, I'm not good at this.
Horrible!
It's horrible!
That's what I expected, someone not from Team Valor.
Oh, I don't even do Pokemon Go, Pat.
Exactly.